from us. So, okay, we're at about 25. I'm sure people will start to file in, so we'll kind of kick it off. So I know a lot of you that are on right now have kind of taken, have been a part of our virtual presentations we've done with buyers all of this week and last week. And so as we've done those presentations, they've gotten visibly better every single time we've done it. And I'm really proud of all the brands and how they've just done a really great job of, in a very difficult climate, virtually getting the point of your brand across. And it's, it's super critical right now in this climate to be able to present your brand in a very effective way. And once everything goes back to normal, hopefully here in the summer and fall, hopefully we can take some of these lessons and apply it to when we're doing in real-time meetings once again. So it's always, I can sit up here as an ex-sales director and talk to you about how I would pitch a brand, but it's always good to I think, get it from the other side of the desk on how a buyer would want to be pitched and presented to. And so I was able to connect with Allison Ball. She was the head of grocery at Bi-Rite for many years and has now been consulting and with her online course, Retail Ready. And so we just thought it was a good time to kind of run a webinar, riff off of one of each other, kind of talked about, how it is from the sales side, how it is from the buy-in side, and really talked about how to craft your message in the best way so that you get to that yes and you get to your product being on the shelf. So with that, I will record everything. We will open it up to Q&A at the ends, and I will let Allie kind of start it off from here, and we'll go back and forth between us throughout.
Fantastic. Thank you for that intro, Cameron. I'll tell you guys a little bit more about myself, but today I'm going to talk about my 4-step process to perfecting your pitch and connecting with wholesale buyers. So I've got so much information for you guys. So let's get right to it. So don't drop by. This is my #1 rule for having a successful first meeting and the opportunity to pitch to a wholesale buyer. It's just that, don't drop by. So now I know that we are in this unprecedented time with COVID, and you might be thinking like, well, duh, Allie, like, of course I'm not going to drop by right now. But I need to emphasize the importance of this, even after COVID is long over, or like things are returning to this sense of normalcy. And you might think at that point that it is appropriate to swing by. So don't drop by has been my golden rule for years. And frankly, Cameron, like, I went back and forth on whether or not this was even necessary to bring up. And I concluded that it is. Okay, so I want you guys to make sure that you don't get any ideas about dropping by is a good method when you pitch in the future either. Okay, so buyers are busy. Just like you wouldn't want to be interrupted with someone dropping by your kitchen unannounced in the middle of a production shift, buyers don't want you dropping by in the middle of their workdays. So while you might feel like this is the natural first step in connecting with buyers, I guarantee you that it's not. So I'm here today to tell you my 4-step process for connecting with buyers without dropping by, and how to have this super successful wholesale pitch, how to land on retail shelves. So it begins with this rule: don't drop by. Okay, so now that I get off my soapbox, I'll tell you a little bit about me. So here is my 60-second background. Cameron, like you said, I am a former grocery buyer, former head of grocery at Bi-Rite Market in San Francisco, turned wholesale consultant. So this is me. I left Bi-Rite 6 years ago and started my consulting business, coaching brands on wholesale strategy. I saw time and time again that great product, really delicious product, really values-driven product wouldn't succeed on the retail shelf, or wouldn't even make it to the retail shelf in the first place because they weren't ready for wholesale. I was determined to like peel back the curtain here and share wholesale secrets with emerging brands like you guys. And that's why I started consulting and launched my online course, Retail Ready. So all that being said, I've heard hundreds of buyer pitches. I've had thousands of samples left for me with, in little brown craft bags with my name on it when I was in a buyer role. So I'm so excited, like you said, Cameron, to give the buyer perspective and talk about like what happens on the other side. So I've got a 4-step process for you guys today. And I'm going to review the 4 steps, and then we will go in depth on all of them. So step number 1, prepare. This seems obvious, but I see people skip this step all the time. I commend you guys on being here, because that's the very first step here. Prepare. Step 2 is plan. Planning is even more important right now. Step number 3, pitch, right? Like that's where that's where all of the magic happens. And then number 4 is follow up. So let's get into them. Step number 1, prepare. I also call this craft your why. So before you reach out to a buyer, before you swing by with samples, before you pitch them on Range Me, before you reach out to them on Instagram, I want you to craft your why. And I know that you've heard this before in terms of branding and marketing, but that's not what we're talking about today. So what do I mean by craft your why when I talk about buyer pitching? It means that there has to be a clear, succinct why, as why would the buyer bring in your product line? Why would they spend time, energy, and labor to bring in your product line? There has to be a compelling reason here. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to guess that a lot of you are thinking like, because my product is really delicious, because my product is the best ever, because my product is unique. If you are all sitting here thinking that your product is the best ever or the most delicious, it's simply not true. You can't all have the best ever product, the most delicious product. It doesn't work like that. So put aside the thought that buyers bring in your product line because it's delicious. When you are stuck on this belief, you don't craft a pitch that's of any interest to a buyer. I'm going to tell you this. When I was a buyer and I heard a food business owner starting their pitch by saying, "Hi, my name is Sarah and I make the most delicious protein ball ever," I would roll my eyes and think like, okay, yeah, sure. You and everybody else. I know, Cameron, you get on this pedestal as well and talk about this, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it's a few things here. I think on a lot of the conversations I've had with the brands that are on here right now, I always kind of say like, don't fall in love with your product. Like to me, it's like the number one kind of trap that brands fall into.
Yeah.
And I do the same thing too as a founder, right? You're so down a rabbit hole of your own brand and you're eating, drinking, sleeping like your brand 24/7, but the buyer isn't. And so the things that are important to you and all the hard work that you've done about your product and your manufacturing, it's all great. And it's all things that has differentiated your product from anything else that's out there. But you just got to realize that part of the story doesn't necessarily resonate with the buyer.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
Saying craft your why in the beginning. I think you have to craft your why not only for why carry my product, but why your store is a perfect fit. And I think you have to also do a lot of research on who's shopping in that store, what other products that store have. And those are the things that are going to impress the buyer, not necessarily your product, because, whether it's kombucha or protein bars or anything like that, every market right now is super saturated. And so the best thing for you to figure out is what you can provide to that buyer and to that retailer to make their job easier versus really pitching your product, which might sound counterintuitive, but it is super important.
Totally. I was actually on a webinar with the category manager of KeHE yesterday, and she said that, get this stat, it's crazy. She said that last year in 2019, they brought on 19,000 new SKUs into their distribution catalog. And Cameron, she said that they accept between 5 and 10% of products that are pitched to them. So if 10% of, their total products pitch ends up being 19,000, it's just insane.
Yeah. And we see it every single day on WeStock. And so I agree, like you got to understand who you're pitching and what they're looking for versus just pitching your product and what differentiates yourself from the market. Yeah,
totally. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but I want to talk about the real reason why buyers bring in new products. So buyers purchase products to enhance sales in a particular category in their store. So their decisions are based on whether or not adding in new product will either increase overall sales or increase their margin or some sort of like financial thing that's tied to that particular category. So remember that a buyer's performance is based off their sales results and based off their numbers. So if your product doesn't increase total sales in your category, it's not worth it for the buyer to spend that time bringing in your product line. So it can't just be a 1-for-1 swap. Like for example, if you make a cold brew coffee and your coffee, the buyer brings in your coffee and it just takes away from Chameleon's cold brew sales, but shoppers aren't buying more iced coffee in general, then it is officially not worth it for your buyer to add in your product line.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think just to add to there, I think something that brands don't think about is your product going on the shelf means another product's coming off the shelf.
Yeah.
So the buyer's making two decisions, right? Like one, continuing a relationship with you and discontinuing a longer relationship they've had with a current brand. So it's not like the buyer it's not an easy decision for them to make because they're going to have to pull something away.
Yeah.
And that's why a big thing for you to really harp on if you're a brand is incremental sales, right? Something that you're going to add value to that category. And so I'll use an example from when we were at Delighted By. I mean, we made chocolate hummus. We weren't going to take any business away from garlic hummus or red pepper. So people were going to buy that and then buy chocolate hummus. And so that incremental sale made us an easy decision for that buyer to make.
Gosh, yeah. If you had pitched me as a buyer, like I feel like a light bulb would have gone off, or like stars behind my eyes, because I would have seen that, right? So clearly, like, this is a unique product that adds value to the category. It expands the category without cannibalizing other SKU sales. That's a great point, Cameron. Okay. So in short, if your product doesn't help that buyer meet their goals, it's not worth it for them to take the time to bring in your product. And that sounds a little harsh, right? Like, but that's step one, articulating why a buyer would bring in your product in the first place for their particular store and how your brand can help them achieve their goals. I literally have my clients like bullet point this out. So what does your brand bring to the table that helps that buyer gain higher sales or more margin, and how can you convey this to them? So that's actually one of the reasons why I, immediately latched onto this idea of WeStock, immediately fell in love with WeStock, because they help you compile this data and build a case that your product is going to move on that buyer's shelves. Once you have that dialed in, you're on your way to being ready to communicate with a buyer. But until you're super clear on why your product is going to help the buyer, you're not only wasting the buyer's time, but you're also wasting your own time. Okay, ready to move on to step number 2? Okay, I call this, plan. So don't drop by. We already talked about this. So you want to plan around how and when you are going to connect with that new buyer for the first time. So this is so important. I've had a lot of people reach out to me over the past 6 weeks. I'm sure you're getting this too, Cameron, asking if it is still an acceptable time to pitch to new buyers or new brokers or new distributors. And I'm really glad to see that there's been awareness around this, that people have paused and questioned it. So while I don't think that it was necessarily appropriate to pitch to new buyers in mid to late March, outside of some of those virtual pitches that were popping up around Expo West being canceled, we are now at the point where buyers are no longer in that like immediate crisis mode. It's still tough, but they're no longer in that initial shock period. And we're actually seeing brands, I'm seeing a lot of retail ready students gain success with buyer pitches and landing new accounts starting, second, third week of April. I know, Cameron, you guys are doing virtual buyer pitches right now, right?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is talk to the buyers like they're human, right? Like, don't start a conversation just pitching your product right now. Like, everyone's at home, everyone's like managing their kids, everyone's managing their day to day. So have a conversation around just, how are you doing? Like, do you have time? Like, make it a conversation to that buyer. Because the buyers aren't running around, in their corporate offices like they usually do. They're at home. They have more time for the emails. We are seeing a higher response rate.
Yeah.
You do have to reach out to them in a human way and not just to push your product to them, because that's not
totally. Like, that's the fastest way to get a buyer to delete your email, right? If you're just copying and pasting the template that you always use, that's not going to work right now. One of the things we're talking about a lot in Retail Ready is almost like leading with the discomfort, like leading with the uncomfortable thing and saying like, hey, like, not even that canned, like, hope you're doing well right now, but like, I'm not even sure if it's appropriate to pitch to you right now, but I have a product that I know is going to help your consumers. I know it's going to help this category XYZ, but like leading with that like, oh, I don't know if this is okay, but like, I'm going to do it anyways, almost gives you permission to go ahead and do it. Right?
For sure.
Okay. So when I was thinking about like presenting information to you guys, I wanted to make sure that it was relevant for right now, but also for the rest of this year. So some of the other things that you're going to think about are seasonal shifts and holidays. You know, from when I was a buyer, I wouldn't accept any new product inquiries that weren't holiday related during the fourth quarter. So you need to think about that seasonal shift and how it affects the buyer. When, you know, when I was in the fourth quarter, I was up to my eyeballs in turkey and candy canes, and I had zero capacity to meet with, say, a new iced tea brand or a chip company. And in fact, if an iced tea brand reached out to me in November, I'd question if they knew what they were doing. When I managed the chocolate and confections category, I did all of that holiday buying in June and July. So it's really important to think about that, the seasonality with buying, and when buyers are receptive to receiving your pitches. We obviously think about promotions, right? Like, is the store doing a big promotion? Are you doing a big promotion? Like, what does that promotional schedule look like? Is it Labor Day weekend? Like, use common sense and don't pitch to them on the Monday of Labor Day, right? In your mind, it might just be another Monday, but if you're reaching out in a particular busy period, buyers, you know, not only you won't get a response, but again, that buyer is going to question if you know what you're doing. From there, category reviews. I'm sure you guys talk about this, Cameron, but you know, if anybody's brand new and they don't know what a category review is, it's when, you know, bigger grocery stores and chains are assessing your category. Typically, you can get that information off their website, from your broker or your distributor, from your other vendors, and you want to make sure that you are planning your outreach appropriately. And then finally,
I will say, just as someone who's had products slotted in outside of a category review period, those, as a salesperson, I view that as those are you know, just kind of like boundaries, but you can cross that category review boundary.
Oh, totally.
If you feel like you have a very pertinent product or you've got a lot of demand for that product, it's just the way that you are bringing it to the retail buyer. And they do their resets, but they usually do have resets in between those where they'll be able to bring in a few items. So don't view those category reviews as law and order, because you still want to be pinging those buyers throughout the year and continuing to have that conversation with them in a respect.
Totally. Yeah, I did a video recently, Cameron, on my Facebook page that was basically like, category reviews are BS. Like, I have so many clients who get into, you know, frankly, like big chains outside of the category review schedule. And of course, like vendors on the other side are saying like, oh, I can't pitch, like they're not reviewing my category until August, like I'm going to wait. And that's not true. Like, if you make a compelling enough pitch to the buyer, of course they're going to bring in your product. If they tell you like, reach back out during category review time, most likely your pitch isn't strong enough.
It's an easy no for them that they know is not going to be like offensive to the brand.
Yeah,
but you know,
exactly.
they got that in their back pocket.
Yeah, totally. God, I used it when I was a buyer too. I was like, you know, oh, sorry, we're not reviewing your category until August. And it just meant like I didn't have to deal with them. It wasn't urgent for me to bring in their product, because at the end of the day, they hadn't convinced me that I needed it urgently. Okay, so then of course, like the day and the time is important too. Like, buyers are often really busy in the early mornings, especially if your target market is, if your target retailers are independents or co-ops or smaller stores. They're often, those buyers are still like placing orders, managing staff, getting their days going. So reach out after those order deadlines in the early afternoon. And then finally, we get back to my golden rule of reaching out to buyers. As I mentioned at the beginning, buyers are busy and you've got one chance to make a positive impression on them. And when you drop by, again, let's say 3 months from now, when you drop by unannounced and interrupting their day, it leaves a less than stellar first impression. So again, like, you might be sitting here thinking like that this rule doesn't apply to you, that you're really polite and charming and that you can do this gracefully, that those other people who I'm talking about are just like barging in, and that you would do it differently. You might think that you'll like swing by really quick, super friendly, ask for the buyer. And if the buyer is busy, no big deal. You'll just leave your samples for them to try later. You are not the exception here. Okay. So I'm actually curious. I bet like lots of people are sitting here, like raising their hands on the other end of their computer, Cameron, like that they do this. I'm going to venture a guess and say that like 99% of my clients would regularly do this before they started working with me. Cameron, did you used to like swing by with samples when you were in a sales role?
Sorry, I'm muted. The way I usually do it is I usually call ahead, schedule an
Yeah.
appointment.
Awesome.
So buyers will do two things. They'll usually forget that they made the appointment with you. So I always call the
Yeah.
day before.
Yep.
And then you get the name, and then at least you're taking that that fact finding mission out of like when you're actually in the store.
Yeah.
And I know that this lesson really applies to like independent small chains. And then, but when you are, reaching out to larger chains too, like just be respectful about planning a formal meeting. One trick that I always learn, and it's surprising how many times this works, but like if it's worked for me for like Target and Whole Foods and different things, like if you say like, hey, I'd love to set up a meeting, they don't want you to have to like fly out, schedule everything, coordinate things for just a meeting with them. So I would say like, listen, I'm going to be in Minneapolis this next week. I'd love to stop by and have a meeting with you. And then they're kind of like, oh, well, you're already going to be in, and I might not even have a plane ticket, but if they get the meeting, I'm going to get there. So it's just about framing it in a respectful way to the buyer. So you're not putting too much responsibility on them to set your schedule.
Exactly. And like I always say this disclaimer. So like, I'll say this. So my husband works in sales in the wine industry. And every time I say, don't drop by, like he cringes because like that is what he does. And he has so much success with it. And like, there is a time and a place for that. But the important thing, I always think that like as brands, you guys need to learn the rules first. So then you know when it's appropriate to break them. So as a whole, like don't drop by. I'll put a little asterisk. There's a time and a place for it. But like on a high level, that is not the way to start a relationship with a buyer. And I want to highlight one reason why this technique doesn't work. So why doesn't it work? Simply because buyers judge you. Buyers are judgy. So like, remember I said that you've got this one chance to make a positive first impression, and you don't want that first impression to be that you are a brand who interrupts their day, right? Buyers make snap judgments about you. Like that is literally their job. They judge your product line and how you're going to be to work with. So when a buyer does decide to carry your product line, they're entering into a relationship with you, one that is rooted in trust and mutual respect. And if you break that respect by dropping by like in the middle of the workday, you're already starting on the wrong foot. Okay, did you want to say something, Cameron?
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. Let's move on to step 3, pitch, or I should say the one chance pitch. So again, I've said this a million times. You've got one chance here. So from that very first interaction with a buyer, you need them to trust you, to trust that you will not only help them achieve their buyer goals, but you're going to be this easygoing, low maintenance vendor who delivers upon your promises, who's a breeze to work with, and is a surefire win for your categories. So when you think about pitching to this buyer, and when you think about like how you're going to get your foot in the door to pitch for the first place, like this is the question that I get all the time. Like, how do I get a hold of this buyer? I'm not going to drop by. I'm not going to bug them. Like, how do I get a hold of them? So outside of COVID time, I always say, pick up the phone and call the store. It is so easy to ignore an email. It's so easy to ignore a LinkedIn message or arrange me message. So pick up the phone and call them. So call that store. Ask to speak to the buyer in your category. It's that simple. So of course, like there are other ways to get a hold of a buyer and pitch them, especially now, the virtual pitches that are happening nowadays through personal connections, through Range Me, through, other buyer platforms and category review schedule application process. But what you say next, how you pitch to that buyer, is the same technique regardless of the platform, or if you're on the phone, or like how you're getting a hold of them. So in a succinct, clear way, you introduce yourself, you introduce your brand, you talk about why your product is going to bring high sales to your category in their particular store. You ask them if you can send them samples, and that's it. It could literally be a 4-sentence pitch. So I'm going to give you guys an example of a pitch here. This is one that I made up. I'm just gonna read it. Like, imagine that I'm on the phone here. So like, hello, my name is Allie and I'm the founder of Up the Ante. We make the first ever farm direct protein bar made with ants. As I'm sure you've seen, alternative proteins and insect-based snacks are in a trending category, up 23% from last year in specialty grocery stores like yours. I'd love to swing by next week with a sample. How does Wednesday at 1 p.m. work for you? Okay. So I think that this works well because it's short, it's to the point. It gave a hard stat on how my category is trending. And then I asked outright if I could drop off samples. Nowadays, that might be, can I ship samples to your home? But same technique, right? So I do want to say a side note here. Up the Ante is a fake company. This 23% is a fake stat. If you are working with insect-based proteins, please don't use the stat because I made it up. The biggest mistakes that I see here when people pitch to buyers is that they ramble on for far too long. They don't let the buyer get in a word edgewise. They turn into this, you guys turn into like weird robots and are awkward as you deliver pitches, even though I know that you could speak to your best friend about your product line all day long, right? Or you don't explain exactly what you sell. Cameron, you've seen a lot of virtual pitches over the past couple weeks or so. Have you seen people like turn into this like strange robot personality that truly isn't them?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like repeating the call outs and things like that, like it's an easy trap to get into because it's a safety net, but again, it doesn't bring a ton of value. I think they're assuming that if you're reaching out to their store, you understand what type of call outs you need on your product to succeed. I think a few things too, it's you want to be doing research on the retailer that you're reaching out to. Like you want to contact another brand that's in that store. You want to understand, do they need slotting? What type of promotional schedule are they looking at? What type of support do you need? Do you need to budget in 25, 50 demos a month? Like, so do that fact finding. And if you don't know a brand, like you can reach out to us. Like obviously we're going to know a brand to connect you in that's been in any store in the country. So I think that's a big thing. You really want to go in understanding, like if you pitch, a ShopRite and then you're not ready for that slotting fee up front, and then you pretty much wasted your time and the buyer's time, you need to understand what that buyer is looking for, because like after this pitch, then they're going to want to know, okay, does this person check off all the boxes that we're looking for?
Yeah. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next step as well, Cameron. But I think the important takeaway is that, again, like going back to this idea that you have one chance, that if you don't know what is expected of you as a brand and you pitch to this buyer only to find out that you need to do 25 demos a year, and you realize you don't have the capacity to do that, again, you've just wasted everybody's time. Not only the buyer.
Oh, sorry. One other thing about samples that you said, like sending samples, if you have the opportunity, always try to set up the meeting to bring in samples yourself, or make the samples yourself, because if your product needs any cooking or any type of stuff, like you can't assume that the buyer is going to cook or prepare your product the way that you want it sampled. So if you're going to drop off samples or anything, you need to provide it in the way that you want it to be consumed. Especially if it needs to be heated or anything like that, like make sure that it's dropped off in that correct way. And then, I know we're going to talk about follow-up, but following up after samples and everything like that. And that call to store, I mean, that pertains to a bigger store as well, or a smaller store. I mean, you can go on Costco's site right now and they have every single, line for all of their regional offices. And you can call and get in front of any of the buyers right now. So you can call the large offices too. I mean, they're not out of the scope for this as well.
Yeah. So I guess when I say call the store, it should just be like call the company, right? Yeah. I'm going to go off script for a second and share some insight about samples. Is that okay, Cameron?
Yeah.
Okay. So I always like to shed light on this idea of the sample box, and this idea that so often, again, like I know I would see it all the time that vendors would swing by, they would want to drop off samples with me. I would like hide in the walk-in because I was too busy to connect with them, and they would leave the samples with the cashier or with the grocery stocker or someone like that. And I love my stocking team. I love the cashiers. Like they are wonderful people, but I will tell you, like in the best case scenario, or how should I say this? If your products look really tempting and really appealing, let's say you make delicious cookies, or you make CBD drops, or like whatever it is, that cashier might be tempted to take them home. You know, if they are like literally delicious cookies, like they are going home with the cashier and they are not ending up in the buyer's hands. Or maybe the buyer's on vacation and that cashier doesn't know that. And so they just get put in the break room upstairs. Or maybe the cashier doesn't know, like you said, Cameron, that it's a hot item that needs to go either be consumed or go into refrigeration or whatever it is. Oftentimes your samples just get tossed into this sample box, literally like a cardboard box sitting at the buyer's desk. And then that buying team typically goes through those samples once every 6 weeks, 8 weeks or so. And by the time the buyers sit down and go through all of those leftover samples that were just dropped off, not in the hands of the buyers, it's not the way you intended your product to be sampled. You know, they're, again, like say the cookies made it into that box. They're crumbly, the bags are all like, you know, crinkled and stuff because they've literally been sitting in this box. Your sell sheet and your price list are separated from your product. You know, it's not the way you want your product sampled. So Cameron, I think you were spot on there saying that the most important thing is getting your samples directly in the buyer's hands so that they're consumed quickly and they're consumed by the right person, right? I think so often you guys drop off samples and you have no idea if the buyer even tried them. And that really changes your follow-up technique, right? Your follow-up messaging is very different if you know the buyer has actually tried your product than if you are wondering whether or not they even saw your samples. How does that land with you, Cameron?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's just if you want to get in front of them, right? Like,
yeah,
I mean, obviously the best way is to sample at a meeting.
Yep.
We're talking, you know, it's like a crutch, right? Being able to just have the samples there and have them taste the
Yep.
product and then talk off of that point. So always just try to sample in person whenever, but if not, try to make it, you know, as clear cut, going to get to the buyer as possible.
Totally. Okay. So let's keep going here. So I'm going to recap. The first part of that step 3 was to get the buyer to say yes to accepting your samples, right? Like Cameron, you said this too. You want to get a hard yes before you just blindly ship them or blindly drop them off. So again, so you get the buyer to say yes to accepting your samples by pitching to them in a succinct, clear way. Let me see. Okay, so finally, now what, right? You have made contact. You've arranged a time that you can get the samples in their hands or ship them nowadays. What do you do? What do you do next? You show up professionally and on time, whether that's in person or on your virtual pitch. You hand off your samples, you hand off your sell sheet and a price list. You tell them, I'm talking about like, again, like if we're in person here, but you tell them one sentence on why you are a good fit for their store. And that's it. You shake hands and you walk away. So often brands think that buyers are automatically going to taste the product in front of them. And that rarely happens unless you have scheduled a meeting with a buyer where, you know, you have scheduled 10 minutes or 15 minutes where you know you're going to taste side by side. It's not a given that they're going to taste them in front of you. So from here, your sell sheet does the talking for you. So if you don't have a professional looking sell sheet, that is the first thing that you need to change. Your sell sheet is the face of your brand and it needs to be as thoughtful as your packaging is, especially nowadays. Cameron and I were talking a little bit about this before the webinar started. As we're doing more and more virtual pitches, your product photography needs to be dialed in. Your promotional package needs to be dialed in. Your sell sheet, your price list, everything needs to look super professional because you don't have the advantage of being face-to-face and charming that buyer with your wonderful personality. So from there, you send a follow-up email and you attach that sell sheet and the price list again. If you are lucky and you get a few more minutes of FaceTime with that buyer, you need to be 100% prepared to answer all of their questions that a buyer is going to ask you about ordering, delivery, pricing, promotions, demo strategy, the logistics of getting your products to their shelves. And Cameron, that goes back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, that it's so important that you research the store before you pitch, because you need to know what's expected of you as a brand before you get into that buyer meeting and you don't have the answers. So if you don't have that stuff worked out, don't call on buyers yet, because the buyer doesn't have time for you to like get back to him or her once you figure out how much it will cost to ship your product to their store, or once you have time to think about your promotional allowance that you can offer, or if you confirm the lead time, or if you'll do guaranteed sales, or if you'll demo 3 times a quarter. When you don't have those answers to a buyer's questions, the buyer hesitates and the foundation of your relationship starts to erode. So make sure that you are ready for that first meeting, because you've got that one chance. So once you do pitch succinctly and professionally and thoughtfully, you are ready for step number 4, the follow-up.
Allie, we have one question about
sure.
So I'm just going to read it. So with the importance of sustainability, do you think a printed sell sheet and price sheet are appropriate? This question is specific for alcohol beverage category, when in-person tastings are typically the meeting that is secured and dropping off samples isn't the norm.
Well, so I can speak. So I want to say a couple different things on here. We are definitely seeing a reduced amount of printed collateral, which I am all for. I love the focus on sustainability, like this person asked. Even at trade shows, like previously, gosh, like I've been going to Expo for 10 years. And in the first few years, I would come home with like a binder full of sell sheets and price lists. And over time, that just like faded a bit more, especially as we have more platforms for getting things electronically to buyers. At the end of the day, though, I think a printed sell sheet and price list is really important, even as we think about sustainability, because buyers then like don't have time. I know this sounds so silly and small, but like buyers literally don't have time to go back into their email and find your sell sheet. What I would advise that you do is don't print off tons, right? Just print off a few, and then you offer to give it to that buyer. And if they don't want to take it, they don't have to. And then you reuse it for the next buyer meeting. I'll tell you this too, like with my husband in wine sales, he brings a price list to every single meeting. It's a non-negotiable. Buyers want that. Cameron, does that answer?
I mean, I would agree. I would say you want to make sure, like, even like when you're doing your full like sales deck and your presentation, like you always want to like print it out and bring it with you. I know it seems double work, but you just want to make sure that they don't lose it, or like it's still top of mind to them. And you're going to end up, dropping off the sell sheet and then emailing the sell sheet multiple times. And it's going to be frustrating, but it's just a follow-up process. I do want to say, if anybody has questions, like please type them in, and we'll answer them throughout here over like the last 20 minutes as we wind down, and we'll definitely answer some questions here too.
I'm almost done like with my official presentation. But let me say this too, Cameron, that I think one of the silver linings of COVID has been that the grocery industry, the food industry, is embracing technology. Like I will tell you, like when I was a buyer, I never got on a Zoom call with brands. Like that just did not happen. And like, how wonderful is it that now we're having those opportunities? Like the grocery industry has been so slow to change, and has been really hesitant to use technology. And again, the silver lining here is that like buyers are being forced to do this. And that is really fantastic. So again, we might see things shift a bit with printed collateral, but I think for now that like buyers are still like placing orders on clipboards, like literally still faxing in orders, if you can believe it or not. So like that printed stuff is really important.
We had one more question come in. I think
I see this. Yeah.
For this, like list questions that you think that the brand needs to know before going into a meeting. I'm sure I can add some too, but like, I'm sure you have kind of like your top 4 or 5, like they need to have those hammered down.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm just laughing because we literally have like an hour-long module on these questions in Retail Ready because there are so many of them, right? But like, I guess for me, it's 4 categories, right? Pricing. And that seems so simple, but like, what's the pricing if I order direct? What's the pricing if I order through a broker? What's the pricing if I order through a distributor? Pricing also, yeah, so pricing, right? Like, how much is it going to cost for me to get the product on my shelf? Promotion. So what can you offer me? What sort of free fills and price reductions and sample allowance, like what sort of promotion can you provide? Pricing, product, order and delivery. So if you're going direct, like what days do you receive orders? Like you as a vendor, what day do I order and what is the cutoff deadline? And then what is the lead time? Like what days are you delivering? Again, like if you use a distributor, they want to know that for the distributor as well. Like there are deadlines and they have to make sure that that fits into their order schedule and then the delivery schedule as well. So at times, you know, like I knew that I would get a lot of deliveries on Tuesday. Like that was my big delivery day. So we would tell vendors, like, you have to show up at our delivery zone between 9 and 9:30 in the morning. And that's it. Like that is your time slot. If you cannot adhere to that time slot, like I'm not going to bring you in. So ordering and delivery. I think those are the 3 big ones. Yeah. Like pricing, promotion, order and delivery. Cameron, is there,
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of retailers that will always ask us like what other stores you're in. Like,
oh yeah, yep,
and
of course.
Got to know kind of like your competition back and forth.
Yep.
You know, where your pricing is in comparison to other brands on the market. Yep. You know, just being really dialed in on how you can service them. But those are really like the core things that you want. Everything else is going to be really pertinent to your brand.
Yeah.
The one thing I hear from a lot of brands is they get worried about, especially as they start to go into larger accounts, about lead time. You control the lead time. So it's like the brand, the retailer, unless it's a very, you know, unusual occasion, they can wait to bring your product in. So it's like, don't give them an unrealistic lead time. Make sure you buffer enough time in, because that's the one thing you don't want to do, is not be able to deliver on your product.
Yeah, that actually it like reminds me of something else. Is availability, right? So like, do you have seasonal out of stocks? Do you have like, what does your availability look like? And I think, Cameron, that's really important right now. Like, obviously we're seeing so many out of stocks. We're seeing supply chain issues in all different capacities. And so that buyer, again, I mean, I guess again, it goes back to trust, right? Like that buyer wants to trust that if they say yes to putting you on their shelf, they know that you are going to provide product and that it's going to sell, right? Like there was nothing more frustrating than being a buyer, committing to a product, and then having like intermittent out of stocks.
Yeah, and they're gonna, especially the larger stores, they're gonna want to see some sort of sales data on velocity and sell through. And so, if you're a bigger brand, of course, you'll probably subscribe to Spins or Nielsen, and that really only makes sense if you have national distribution. If you're smaller, hopefully you're on WeStock. But the biggest thing that they're going to look for is sales per SKU per week per store. And so you really want to be dialed in on that number. So, you know, like, hey, listen, the average hummus sells 8 units per week, which is, I think, what the number is at Walmart, and mine sells 12 at a competitor. This is why I think it would be the perfect fit. You want to be dialed in on that number.
Yeah, Cameron, you just had the perfect pitch, right? Like, as a buyer, I'm like, all right, so yeah, he's right. Like, on average, hummus SKUs sell 8 units a week. He's telling me that he sells 12. If I can increase my sales by 30%, like, why would I not swap out his hummus for what I've got on my shelf? Okay. So step 4, we're almost done here. Step 4 is like, it's so simple and so complicated, right? So I like to call it, you know, so the follow-up, I call it the squeaky wheel. And, you know, this is based off the phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. It is totally true here. Let's talk about how you follow up with buyers. So I'll tell you, the most common complaint that I get is that buyers don't respond to your emails. They don't call you back, even when they say they like your brand, or even after they promise to bring in your product line. And so you guys, I want to be the first person who says that this is normal. So you guys don't know me that well yet, but I am perhaps the most organized person you know. And it would still take me months to bring in product, even product that I truly was devoted to and that I wanted to bring in. There are so many steps to bringing in a new product that you guys as the vendors might not take into consideration. So while the buyer works all of this out, you want to make sure that you're emailing consistently to stay top of mind. You want to make sure, in the past that you were going to trade shows to stay top of mind. You want to make sure that you are showing up where the buyers are to make sure that you are on their radar. So I'm talking about emailing every 2 weeks to say hello, to let them know of any recent press that you've had, or any new promotional materials that you have, or any new category reports that have come out. Basically any reason to email, to pop into their inbox and to remind them that you exist. So you might think that you are annoying at this point. And again, remember that squeaky wheel gets the oil. If you are the first brand that the buyer thinks about when they do your category reset, you are going to be so much closer to the top of the list. So I want you to follow up and follow up and follow up. So I always say that, Cameron, I'm actually interested in how you found this too. I always say that it takes about 7 points of contact to get your product on the retail shelf. And when we work with retail ready students, our goal is to have that happen with 3 touch points. You're succeeding when you can have it happen very rapidly like that. Cameron, do you have a stat that you cite or that you think about from your experience?
Not a specific, but I will say, I've been doing this for a decent amount of time, and I've had some, whether it's Target or Publix or whatever, some retailers where I've sent, 20 or 30 follow-ups before they've gotten off. And Katrina just asked a question, if the follow-up should be off the same thread or a new thread. The way I kind of do it is once you get to 5, maybe send a new one. But what I want to say is that I have been borderline very annoying to buyers and sent 30 responses, new emails, same thread, whatever. I've never gotten a please leave me alone or a listen, you got to stop. I've never received an email like that. And I promise you, I've been more pushy than anyone in this chat. So you have to stay diligent. You've got to put a reminder. A lot of your CRMs will allow you to call the drip campaign. And so it'll just automatically send the email every 2 weeks. And my biggest thing is always try to get to the next step. So it's if the next step is just filling out the paperwork, just hammer them for the paperwork. Next step is being onboarded with the distributor they want, just get to that. So just try to make it as easy as possible. So when they come back, you can say, I've already taken care of that. What's next? And so those are kind of my 2 things. But Katrina, it's really preference. If you're on your 5th email on the same email thread, maybe send a new one and kind of update it. Another little trick is maybe you peek at their LinkedIn so they see you've looked at it, and that's another reminder. It's oh yeah, I owe this person a response. But on that note, never ever 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 reach out to somebody over LinkedIn. It's informal, and I forbid anyone to do it.
I hate it. Yeah, and Cameron, I think that you make some really great points here. And Katrina, this is a good question. And I think that the important thing is if your subject line isn't getting a response, start a new thread, right? You change up the try, change up the offer, right? And so Cameron, I think you're spot on there saying that you've got to try to get that buyer to the next step. And one tiny tweak that I see that leads to really good results is making sure that you have the ask up top in your email. Hey, Allie, I'm writing to I'm writing to get you to, I don't know, say this nicer, but I'm writing to get you to fill out this paperwork. Then, info. Again, please send back the paperwork from whatever. And I think it has to be so clear what you're asking that buyer to do. And, if you're rambling, if you don't have a direct ask, if you don't say, when can I ship samples, or what is your address? That buyer's just going to move along to the next email. If it's just an informational email, the buyer doesn't do anything with that. So you have to be the one telling them what you want them to do. Cameron, I think you also make a great point. I love that you say that you had accounts where you were reaching out like 20, 30 times. A buyer is going to tell you if they want you to go away. So until you get that hard no from a buyer, it's your responsibility to keep following up. And the thing is, like, I get it. Like, it's going to push you out of your comfort zone. You're going to think that you're annoying. Gosh, I have a stat, Cameron. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it was something like some sales stat. I can pull it up, but it was something about how, like, most sales managers, most sales reps reach out, it's like 100% reach out one time, like, 70% reach out 2 times. And then it went on, and it was like, it got down to it where it was like 10% of them reach out more than 5 times. And like, that's when the sales get closed. So, yeah.
And I will say, like, the brands that go to Expo West and go to Fancy Food and say, like, and I hear then a year later, like, oh, it wasn't worth it. It's just because they didn't follow up.
Yeah.
Like,
did you just see my face? Yeah. I'm sorry that I made that. But yeah.
But the ROI isn't going to be there until the next year, right? So you're going to need to continue to follow up. It's going to take some time. Any of our radish customers who deal with us on the sales side, it's like, hey, listen, we haven't seen anything this month. Like, it just takes a long time, and it's going to be continuous follow-up. And, a lot of times you can open up 3,000 stores in a year. All those orders might fall into 2 weeks of each other. So it's just follow-up is kind of everything.
Totally. I'll tell you, I had a retail ready student late last year who was like, Allie, like, I'm going to throw in the towel. It's been 3 weeks since I first started pitching and I haven't gotten a response. I was like, it's been 3 weeks. Like, you're just getting going. Like, of course you don't have any responses back. Like, this is just like the natural cycle. Like, grocery is slow. Okay. So let's recap a bit. So the 4 steps. Step 1, prepare, craft your why. Why is your product going to drive sales for that buyer? And how can you prove that? Until you have that nailed down, don't proceed. Step number 2 was plan, right? And of course, I said this, don't drop by. Remember that no one likes to be interrupted during their workday. So plan about the time of year, the season, the day that you're pitching out, the category review schedule. Just plan. Like, don't wing it. Step number 3 was pitch, the one chance pitch. You have one chance to come across as prepared and trustworthy. You want to make sure that you are able to answer all of those buyers' questions before you even make that initial conversation, that initial pitch. And then 4 is the follow-up, the squeaky wheel. Follow up until you get that hard no. Okay, that's what I've got. I hope, we definitely have a little bit more time for Q&A. So I hope these 4 steps gave you guys some guidance for next time that you're pitching to a wholesale buyer. If you guys need help with any of these steps, let's continue the conversation. You guys can send me a message. I'll put my contact information here. I'm always on Instagram. That's like the most common place where you see me hanging out. You can send me a DM. I'm on Facebook as well. I have a great newsletter where I email wholesale tips every week. Every day would be a little excessive. But Cameron, this was so fun. Do we have any other questions that came in?
So we have one question. Is there any way to repair the damage if we did those things we were said to do? So
yeah, there is.
You can always go back to there's people that get kicked out of retailers and then get back in a year later. Yeah. So I will say that the golden rule is, like, it's easier to get on the shelf than off the shelf. And, it's easy to open up new accounts. It's really hard to support them. So you do want to make sure that you're ready for an account when you get it and you're doing the right stuff. But yeah, if it's been a few months, like, reach back out to the store and start up a conversation. It's never too late to reach back out to them and say, hey, listen, a few things have changed. So, and then we have another one that says, as for trade shows, would you recommend independent shows or distributor ran trade shows?
I have thoughts on that. And I'll just say with Sarah's too, like, Sarah, buyers change quite rapidly. There's a lot of turnover in what categories buyers are managing and stuff. So, like, don't think that you've missed your chance. You can always go repair that relationship. Okay. And then for trade shows, there's a lot of thought that goes into trade shows and which makes sense for your brand. It depends where who you're trying to sell to, whether or not they are at those shows, where you are in the stage of your growth, and if you can support the accounts that you might get at those trade shows. I love Expo West. I love Fancy Food. I love the Good Food Mercantile. If you guys are smaller brands looking to sell regionally or into your independents. But then I also like some of the buyer shows. I used to go to Unified Tabletop, and that was a great one. Cahey show was great. And then the ECRS show was really, really fantastic and like more curated. So it just it depends on you and your brand and what your goals are.
Your best bet is you're going to have to do most of them and then measure the ROI on the show, and then craft what shows are your best fit based on what's the most successful for your brand. And Ali, I know you talked about price sheets. I know you did like a kind of like how to build your price sheet. So we'll definitely like send a link out with that.
Yep.
And then in terms of sales decks and sales presentations for everybody like on the call, we're going to put together like a plan on how to craft your sales deck and your presentation to the buyer. So that will kind of, we'll try to send that out in the next 2 weeks. And so I know we've been getting a ton of sales decks for the virtual presentations we've been doing. So we'll kind of put together a format on what to follow and a guideline. And then we can pair that with Ali's price sheet, and you should have kind of a really good outline to follow for both those assets.
Great. I wonder, gosh, Cameron, too, I'm wondering if I have a podcast on sell sheets or pitch decks and stuff. I don't know. I didn't mention this, but maybe you did, Cameron, at the beginning. Like I have a podcast. It's called Food Biz Wiz. Cameron and I are recording an episode for it next week, which will be really fun. But there's a lot of good resources on there. We've done a few recent like COVID related episodes that have been really insightful for emerging brands. And I encourage you guys to check that out if you haven't joined in on the podcast episode yet.
Awesome.
Any other questions, Cameron?
I think that's it for now. So I'm sure more will trickle in and I'll send them through. This definitely probably won't be the last thing we do together. So I'll keep everybody posted, and I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Thanks to you guys. This was really fun.
All right. Stay safe. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.